I want you to step back in time with me just a little bit and remember, it is January of 2012, and everyone is feeling hopeful in the world because it didn't end like John Cusack told us it would in 2009. And in the world of social media, big things are happening. And within the past few months, you had a really solid establishment of a variety of platforms, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. These are all platforms that were doing well. And in that space, organizations were starting to think about how they could engage with clients, how they could establish new clients, how they could really dazzle audiences. And one of the stars of the show at that time, of course, was Twitter. And brands were really excited for the opportunities they saw on Twitter. You had these hashtag stories that began to trend and people telling their stories, and they were really motivated. And then enters McDonald's into this space. And I would just, if you would for me, maybe a one-word statement that you think of when you think McDonald's. French fries, Big Mac. What? Golden Arch. And I heard I think a mutter of disgust. Thank you, Belinda. Other things you think of? That's it. Golden Arches, Big Mac.
Family friendly.
Family friendly. All right. I think they were hoping that other people would think that as well. Good but bad. That's so appropriate. So they bought ad space on Twitter's homepage, and they ran hashtag McD stories, hoping that there would be families telling these great stories about how we got together and had Happy Meals, and the kids wanted to have every toy, and we loved our chicken nuggets, and Big Mac song, I don't know. But that isn't what happened. Instead, some of the real McDonald's stories, McD stories, weren't as good. Hair-raising stories. One time I walked in and I could smell type 2 diabetes in the air and I threw up. That's, of course, what you want to hear if you're McDonald's. It gets better. I wouldn't have gone back either, personally. And then the last one, and this is the one that I think is the real kicker for me. I lost 50 pounds in 6 months after I quit working and eating at McDonald's. So when this happened, they saw within 2 hours that this was going badly. And so they pulled the ad from Twitter. They said, shut it down. And over the course of another hour, it all tapered off and died. And so they nipped it in the bud, if you will, before it really got going. And that was good for them. And these events, these sort of moments, these blips for organizations where things don't go like they planned, they're really common. So if you're the American Red Cross and it's 2011, then you were a bit startled to see on your official Twitter account this tweet. Ryan found 2 more 4-bottle packs of Dogfish Head's Midas Touch beer. When we drink, we do it right. Hashtag getting slizzard. I don't know if I'm the American Red Cross. I don't want my official account having a message about going and getting smashed. And so what had happened is an employee thought that he was on his own personal account. And what was even better is they did this very quickly. People were laughing about it. And then the brewery, Dogfish Head, got involved. And in the end, this event became an incredible fundraising opportunity for the American Red Cross. I'm convinced they planned it, but I don't know. So you had someone who just made a silly mistake. He tweeted something from the official account when he thought it was his. They took it down. They handled it well. It was funny. And then people raised money for them while they were drinking beer. Now, the third example that I want to start with tonight is less lighthearted, but I think is a really important lesson for all of us. Show of hands, who uses some kind of social media platform? Okay, that sounds familiar. I think most of us have some digital presence. So in 2013, Justine Sacco was traveling from London to South Africa. She had family she was going to visit. And she used her Twitter account like a personal journal, a diary. And So she'd been tweeting, weird German dude, you're in first class, it's 2014, get some deodorant. In her monologue as I inhale BO, thank God for pharmaceuticals. She had a tiny Twitter following, like 100 people. No one ever followed her. No one ever responded to her account. And so she just really posted whatever she wanted. Our next post, it's chili, cucumber sandwiches, bad teeth, I must be back in London. And just sort of this snarky, it's not nice. Like nothing she's posting is very nice, but it wasn't terrible. Like, okay, that's, whatever, you're a snarky person. Then she tweeted this right before getting on the plane. She tweeted it, she waited a couple of minutes, she got no response. She's like, oh, whatever, I thought it was funny. Gets on the plane. And it turned into a viral self-inflicted crisis for her. You'll see SIC, it's a self-inflicted crisis. And so on the 13-hour flight to South Africa, a journalist picked up her tweet and shared it with all of his thousands of followers. From there, within a couple of hours, #FireJustineSacco was a top global trend on Twitter. The CEO of her company posted about her travel schedule and that she was in the air. They couldn't respond, but that they would deal with the issue when she was on the ground. By the time she landed, she had lost her job. She had become the focus of global ridicule, and she had put her family in South Africa in a really difficult position because they were involved in social justice and racial issues in South Africa. And this is an incredible lesson in the power that social media has in the world that we're in today. A single tweet, or just something that she's like, this is just dumb, snarky, whatever. It completely changed her life. It's worth noting that Justine Sacco was the chief communication officer for a tech company. She should have known. This is the kind of thing that she talked to her people about. And so tonight, that is what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about these self-inflicted crises, these moments when rather than choosing avenues of positive communication, people choose the other option, the other opportunity, the other path. And so Katie had a fantastic introduction. I don't need to tell you that I did my master's here, and it was a wonderful experience. I did my PhD at George Mason, also studying crisis communication, and I now am at national championship winning Clemson University. But one thing that Katie didn't mention at my request was that one of the best moments from my time at UA Little Rock was when a presenting group developed as their innovation, in a course on diffusion of innovations, the Avinash Stash. And the other thing that I do want to mention is my incredible family. I would not be where I am today without my wife, Sarah. I would not be who I am today without my boys, Henry on the left, he's 3, and Charlie on the right, he's 1. And right after we take that really sweet photo, that great moment, he dug in with his little baby claws and ripped my chin off. Talking about positive communication and managing and preventing self-inflicted crises. We're going to get on the same page with some shared definitions and some best practices. If we are co-creating our social worlds, then it's important that we're talking about the same thing. So we're going to get on the same page with definitions. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the discourse of renewal theory. Dr. Ulmer was here for many years, and he and Tim Sano and Matt Seeger developed the discourse of renewal theory, and it is a guiding theory for much of my research, and so we'll talk about that. And then lastly, we're going to unpack some cases of self-inflicted crises, and we're going to look at failures and we're going to look at successes. One of the most important things that Dr. Ulmer taught me when I was studying with him here was that we fixate on the negative. We fixate on the failures. And we can learn a lot from failures, but we also need to highlight and promote the successes because we should be aware of the ways we can learn about how to do things better when people do things well. And so that guides a lot of how I teach and a lot of how I approach my research. And so we're going to look at both. A definition that I use is the Ulmer, Sano, and Seeger definition of crisis. This is a clunky, academic-y definition. I'm not going to read it to you, but keep in mind some key words from this. That this is a specific event or series of events, that it's unexpected, that it changes the situation that we're living in because it's uncertain, and it's not just bad. We focus on the threat, we focus on the bad, but it's not just bad, because crises present organizations with opportunities as well as threats. And so that is the context in which I study what I do. And the discourse of renewal theory tells us a whole lot about how we can communicate more effectively. A lot of crisis research tends to be fairly descriptive, fairly evaluative in nature. And so we talk about what happened after the fact. And it's great when you have 20/20 hindsight to be able to do that. But what the discourse of renewal does is, as a normative crisis theory, it attempts to get ahead of crises and help teach how communication could be more effective on the front end and how we can avoid crises to begin with. So these 4 key tenets of organizational learning, effective organizational rhetoric, ethical communication, and prospective vision provide a framework for how organizations can do things better. In organizational learning, we see things like learning from failure. So McDonald's learned from #McDStories not to try to do that kind of event on Twitter because it's not going to go well for them. They did learn from that failure, and they're much more Twitter savvy now. You have vicarious learning from other organizations, what they do and how they do it. With effective organizational rhetoric, you have really an interesting focus, I think, on how leaders communicate. Do leaders present a picture for the future? Do leaders talk in such a way that they can bring along this idea of a new normal? Who has had an experience in their life that was life-changing? Like, who's experienced anything? I mean, this is anything from losing a job, gaining a job, going through marriage, divorce, having kids. Like, really, they're life-changing events all the time. So I was hoping we'd have 100% participation. How often in those moments do we attempt to get back to normal? Who's thought that? All the time. And when you're talking about organizations going through crisis, that's really problematic because there is no going back. The world is new now. This is a different place. And so when leaders can work with members of their organization to cast a vision for what new normal looks like, then you can have renewal after a crisis. You see that in the case Dr. Ulmer talks about in his book of Malden Mills. This is a textile factory that burned down. And the president and CEO went to his employees and said, we're going to rebuild. And while we do that, we're going to keep paying you, and we're going to keep maintaining your benefits, and you're going to work with us, and we're going to make it better. He cast a vision for what normal was going to look like over the ensuing months and years, so that when they came back, they were a more effective company. And if you took Dr. Ulmer's crisis class, then these are very familiar examples. In ethical communication, this is something that I was talking about with Dr. Driscoll earlier today. That we talk about ethics and communication, but maybe we don't have an excellent shared definition all the time. And so that's something that is important to consider. And in this instance, things like being open and transparent are important. You see that with the Schwann's case, again from Dr. Ulmer's book. Schwann's, the big yellow trucks that deliver food, yes? In the 90s, they had a foodborne illness outbreak. And when the executive team came together and they were figuring out how to respond, the CEO said, if we were our customers, what would we want us to do? And that vision guided their response. And so they were open and transparent, and that's how they approached the entire response. And lastly, you have this idea of prospective vision, the importance of looking to the future, of focusing on what's going to come next and seeking renewal rather than focusing on who is to blame here. I think it's Bobby's fault. Bobby did it. Hi, Bobby. And so rather than fixating on whose fault it is, who's to blame, and just getting caught up in that and trying to duke it out, looking to the future and seeking opportunities for what will come next. And again, I think in all of these examples, we can see those leaders who do that well, who cast that vision and talk to us about how to do that more effectively. I'm going to walk through 3 cases now. And these cases are in order: failure, failure, success, kind of a weird gray area, and resounding success. Has anyone shopped at Urban Outfitters? Urban Outfitters has a really consistent marketing strategy, and that is do awful things and get people to pay attention to it. So in 2003, they launched their product, Ghettopoly. And this was a riff on Monopoly, and it had spaces on the board like Cheap Trick Avenue. And they got a lot of backlash, and they were criticized, and they pulled the product, and they said, yeah, sorry, we won't do that again. And you fast forward a few years, there were little blips here and there. But then in 2010, they had a young girl wearing a shirt that said, eat less. They had another shirt that had two color options. One was white, the other was Obama. They got a lot of backlash. They were criticized. They said, we're going to do better. We'll do better. Just let us try again. 2011, they stole art from independent artists and used it in their products. Within a few days, hashtag Urban Outfitters and hashtag thief or thieves were trending. They lost 17,000 social media followers in an hour. It was, I mean, they continue to come back and put themselves in these crisis moments. In 2012, they were sued by the Navajo Nation for using the word Navajo without permission. And at that point, they apologized and said, you know, we've had a history of doing things that maybe aren't great, but we're gonna do better. We're gonna make things right. May have sounded a little bit like Mark Zuckerberg in 2010, 2011, 2012, 2013, 2018. We're gonna do better. And so they went a couple of years, and no real issues. And then they ran a vintage sweater line. And so they said they had this whole campaign of going out to flea markets and going out to different places and finding these vintage sweaters, one-of-a-kind products. And they would put them on the site, and there's just one, and if you get it, great, and if you don't, well, you're out of luck. And it's an interesting idea. It's kind of a neat way to really attract customers, except that one of their products was a fairly blatant reference to the Kent State Massacre. And if you recall, there were protests at Kent State. This is the 1970s. There were protests, and there were students out protesting, and the National Guard was called in, and there was confusion. And in that situation, the National Guard opened fire on a group of students, and several died. And this is the sweatshirt, and I'm just going to tell you that this is going to be shocking when you look at it, and so I just want you to know. This is the sweater that they posted for Kent State. And so shortly after it happened, people began posting on social media and saying, how could you do this? This is so insensitive. This is terrible. Why would you post this? Why would you, and talking about the Kent State Massacre and talking about what had happened. And Kent State published a statement saying, this is an event that we still talk about all the time. This is still very real for people on this campus. There are still people on this campus who knew people who died. This is incredibly insensitive. And Urban Outfitters posted, within a few hours, they had pulled the product, and they posted a tweet that said, we apologize if anyone was offended. It's not blood stains and bullet holes that you're seeing there. It's just natural wear and tear on that sweatshirt that we found at a flea market. Okay. It wasn't particularly believable. People on Twitter were even angrier at that point and continued to attack the organization. It actually became more drawn out and more of an issue over the following days because their response and their apology was a non-apology. And so then, shortly after that, the CEO posted this lengthy letter. Weirdly not on their media or on their website. He posted it, he got it to run in Time magazine, which was a bit strange, I thought. But it was a heartfelt apology. It was sincere, and it did seem genuine. But it also came across as a little too late, too little too late. Words are hard sometimes. And So you have this moment where an organization that has consistently done things that are inappropriate and in bad taste and problematic, they do it again. And then they have a non-apology apology. And the organization has gone through these cycles over time and has continued to go through cycles of losing followers and impacting their sales. And then they wait and there's some calm and people return. But it's a really important moment, I think, to look at a case of an organization that consistently chooses the other path instead of choosing to foster positive communication, instead of approaching these instances as opportunities for growth and learning. And so this case is one that when I was writing about this, my mom is my editor, and more than once she would call and say, "You have to change the Urban Outfitters section. You're just attacking them." And so it's worth noting that eliciting these emotional responses, it's easy, even as someone who's trying to be an objective observer from the outside and use an analytical academic lens to assess the situation. That's hard to do sometimes too. But it is an incredible opportunity from the perspective of the discourse of renewal to have learning from failure, learning from organizational failure. The second case is one that is different because Starbucks is in the news right now for a lot of reasons, mostly because in Philadelphia, if you're not familiar with the situation that happened about a week ago now, actually I don't know if it's been a week. Time means nothing when I travel. It could have been yesterday. But there were a couple of guys, African-American males, who were sitting in Starbucks in Philadelphia waiting for a business associate. And they, short version, manager called the police because they were sitting while black in a Starbucks. And it has been an ongoing issue. It's not resolved at this time. And I'm watching closely to see what happens because it was an interesting case of failure. But it is also worth noting that Starbucks is closing 8,000 locations. I can't remember what day. They're closing it to have an extensive training on race relations and engagement and discrimination. And so with that context in mind, the case that we are talking about is related to the same topic. And so for me, it was a bit ironic that this event happened right before I came to talk about a different case just a couple of years ago. But in 2013, there were these series of talks that Starbucks hosted at their headquarters in Seattle and then in the region. And they had community groups come together, and so you had Starbucks employees and you had members of local community and local leaders, and they came together to talk about race in America. And over the course of these talks over a few weeks, there were a lot of successes. And these talks were hailed as really important and meaningful and very successful. And it culminated in some really big events that got them a lot of good press. And on the tail of that, Howard Schultz, the CEO, said, "You know what? We've got momentum. We're doing things here. This is good. This is important. We're going to have everybody talk about race." And so he launched, via an open letter to everyone, the Race Together campaign. And he said, starting Monday, baristas all across the U.S. are going to write #RaceTogether on cups. And when you go to Starbucks, your barista is going to talk to you about race in America. Now, can anyone tell me any possible holes in this plan? No? Oh, yeah. Foolproof? Okay. Yeah. As you might imagine, there were some people who weren't super happy with how this progressed. Point number one, in their promotional materials, all the hands are white. Yeah. Point number two, Not sure what Starbucks was thinking. I don't have time to explain 400 years of oppression to you and still make my train. Hashtag race together. But these examples were fairly small in the grand scheme. You had people who were trolling them and just being rude, saying unkind things. But you also had people who were genuinely interested in seeing how Starbucks could make this work. And so you had a group of people, it was actually a fairly small number of people, but with a lot of presence at that time, asking a lot of genuine questions. And so Corey DeBrouwer was the director of corporate communication, and they were posting questions like, how can a barista be expected to deal with the complexity of racial relations while also serving hot beverages? Maybe a little bit of snark. But the third question was a real question asked by multiple people. Are you going to educate your workers on race relations and racism in America, and will you compensate them for this? A follow-up question was, how are you training them? How are you equipping them? Where's the space to have these conversations? And instead of addressing those questions, DeBrouwer began blocking people. And anyone who tweeted at him got blocked. And then a few hours later, he disconnected his Twitter account. It was literally his job to talk to people about this campaign and what it was doing and how it was going to be successful, and he disconnected from Twitter. The next day, he reinstituted his account. He said, I'm sorry for disconnecting. That was inappropriate. I felt overwhelmed. And at the end of that week, Schultz posted another open letter. And he said, we're voluntarily closing the Race Together campaign. We feel it was a huge success. Stay tuned for more. And scene. And that was it. That was the end of the conversation. And so you had this incredible opportunity for Starbucks leadership to go to a space of really great organizational rhetoric, to have some of that effective leadership and step in and say, maybe we didn't do enough on the front end to plan for this, but we're going to do these things. We're going to pause the campaign. We're going to do some training for people who are interested in that, and we're going to create spaces for it. There are so many things they could have done, and instead, their official Twitter account, their other social media, didn't acknowledge that it was happening. The people whose job it was, the executives, didn't engage in the conversation. And when it was all said and done, they started things back up as if nothing had happened. And so, if you look at that snapshot and you don't look at the rest of time for Starbucks, that's a pretty massive failure. It's a pretty compelling failure, but it's Starbucks. And so if you look in the crisis literature, Ulmer, Sono, and Seeger talk about this, others do as well. The term social capital, this is something the idea of social capital, this is a familiar concept. In the crisis literature, we talk about it as the reservoir of goodwill, that organizations build up a reservoir of goodwill over time by having effective communication, by building good relationships, and that when a crisis hits, there's an opportunity to tap into that reservoir of goodwill, and your stakeholders give you the benefit of the doubt. They're willing to listen when you say, give us some time, we're working on this. Starbucks has such an incredible reservoir of goodwill that they can have this event that has globally trending hashtags about how ridiculous it is, and a week later, everyone's forgotten that it happened. And so that's the trade-off, and that, for me, is the more important lesson in this case. Because for an organization like Starbucks, it takes a lot to get to a point where they're actually losing customers, and they're losing following, and they're losing ground. And so I think, yeah, they should have been involved in the conversation. But it's also the lesson that they have done all kinds of work on the front end to build a community that believes in what they do and who they are, other than just expensive coffee. In every city where there is a Starbucks location, they have community efforts, they have fundraising, they have scholarship support, they have community engagement and service campaigns. And they don't really publicize it unless you go looking for it. But people who live in those communities know, they build good relationships, and so they've done that work on the front end. Starbucks is doing okay. But I think it would have been so much better if they hadn't just gone halfway and allowed themselves to fall back on that reservoir. The last case is, as my students would tell you, my favorite self-inflicted crisis case. I talk about it in every class that I teach. They are tired of hearing about it. But it's just so good. Are you familiar with hashtag why I stayed? Is this something that you're familiar with? Have you heard of this? Anyone have no clue what this is? All right. That's okay, because I'm going to tell you, so don't worry. In 2011, this is where my wife would say, no one cares what year it was. No, it was 2000. You'll see in just a second when I load the tweet. Anyway, see, this is one of those moments. Have it in your notes. Always have it in your notes. But there was an event where Ray Rice, a professional athlete, was caught on video knocking his then fiancée unconscious and dragging her off of an elevator by her hair. And the video went viral. And the conversation, shockingly, at least to me at the time, wasn't predominantly, or wasn't just, wow, what a horrible situation, what a horrible person, this is really terrible. It wasn't attacking Ray Rice. Most of the conversation was, why didn't Janae Palmer leave? Why didn't Palmer get out of that relationship? That guy's obviously a sleazeball. Why doesn't she get out? Why doesn't she leave? She must be so dumb. She must be an idiot. And that was the conversation that was happening. Now, granted, social media can be a really terrible place, but that's what people were saying. And so Beverly Gooden, a woman who is not a celebrity, she's not someone you would have heard of before, she didn't have a big Twitter following, she wasn't YouTube famous, she's just a person who had survived an abusive relationship. And she was furious that she was seeing this conversation play out on national TV and on social media. This why wouldn't she just leave message. And so she got on her Twitter and she started to post with hashtag why I stayed about her experience of surviving an abusive relationship. He said he would change. He promised it was the last time. I believed him. He lied. Hashtag why I stayed. I stayed because I thought love was enough to conquer all. I had to plan my escape for months before I even had a place to go and money for the bus to get there. I tried to leave once after an abusive episode and he blocked me. He slept in front of the door the entire night. And she was just sharing her story. And she just did it because she needed to get it off her chest. But what shocked her was that before long, people she didn't know started sharing their own hashtag why I stayed stories. And before long, it was trending. It was number one trend in the U.S. It was trending globally. It was a conversation that also morphed into hashtag why I left, which became, for the most part, a really supportive space of people giving advice and help and encouragement of, this is why I left, this is how I got out, these are the ways that I approached the situation. And so you had these two hashtags. And people who had a space to share their experiences and be really supportive. Then, enter DiGiorno. Who really likes frozen pizza? I like all pizza, so it's fair game. I like all pizza. DiGiorno has a really silly Twitter account. It's a ridiculous account. They post goofy things all the time. They have competitions of things like, what should our next tweet be? And people respond. They get huge engagement from that. And one of the games that DiGiorno plays in its social media, in its Twitter strategy, is the hashtag game. What can we do with any hashtag that's trending? And so all the time they're jumping on hashtags, whatever's trending, and they're just talking about pizza. Doesn't matter what it is. Pizza, 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 pizza. And so, without researching the hashtag, it's on the top right there. And so within a couple of minutes, people were really vociferously, it's a fun word, they were really angry and just all over DiGiorno. How could you be so thoughtless and insensitive and careless and rude? How could you use the pain of people who are in these relationships to sell pizza? Arguably not very good pizza. And so you had these people who were just furious. And instead of shutting down their Twitter, instead of blocking people who posted, instead of what some people would say is best practice, just having a copy and paste apology that they could tweet to everyone, they spent the following 12 hours personally apologizing to every single person who tweeted at them. Rhonda, I'm so sorry. You're right. It was stupid. We didn't research the hashtag before we posted it. We dropped the ball. We'll do better next time. Harper, it was insensitive and dumb. We can do better, and we will next time. And what was interesting was that it didn't stop there, because Kristen was like, I don't care. You guys are stupid. She tweeted at him again. They apologized a second time. You're right. We have no excuse. We need to do better. For every person who tweeted at them, they had a personalized apology, and they would apologize twice with that apology, a personalized response, until people stopped tweeting. It didn't stop. There was a pause in the middle of the night. I don't know if people went to bed, but it picked back up the next day. And this next part is what makes it my favorite case. Because one, that's good. Like, they owned it. They screwed up, and they acknowledged it. But the best part is that after a couple of hours, so Rhonda tweeted and Harper tweeted, and by the time Kristen gets on board, they've already calmed down. They're like, oh, they apologized. Cool, I'm good. So when Kristen tweets, Rhonda's like, hey, they apologized. They owned it. They made a mistake. Cut them some slack, Kristen. And so over the course of a few hours, there was this sort of undertow and this backward wave going the other way. And so as people came in and started learning about it and tweeting at DiGiorno, wow, you're really stupid, people who had been the first to criticize became the first to defend. And it was incredible. As I was studying it all and looking at the data, we have a really neat platform that we get to use in studying social media, and so I had all the tweets. And so I was going through and reading them as the timeline was going along, and I saw this unfolding as I was reading them. And I didn't believe it. I was like, this had to be like a one-off random thing. And it went on. And so for the entirety of DiGiorno's apology timeline, you had these people who were also defending DiGiorno and saying, look, they screwed up. They owned it. They did the right thing. So over the course of a few days, what went from one or two articles of how to really screw up with social media became multiple articles and multiple publications about how to handle a crisis when you put your foot in it. When you screw up, this is how to do it. And so DiGiorno took what was undeniably a really not great situation with just stupid accident and stupid mistake and something that they never should have done with a little more research, became a huge win in the way that they demonstrated a willingness to be honest about mistakes and to be transparent. They communicated really ethically. And so you saw a great example in this case of implementing those lessons. And so when we think about that, when we think about the lessons of these self-inflicted crises, when we think about those important takeaways, there's some really easy ones. There's some really straightforward ones. Respond quickly and openly. Act like DiGiorno and say, yeah, we screwed up. We're really sorry. That's not always going to be enough. There are going to be times when the crisis is too big for sorry. And that's another thing that you have to know, and that's part of the communication process, but that never hurts. Secondly, be transparent. Crises only get worse when you try to sweep things under the rug. Be willing to acknowledge those mistakes when they happen and be willing to apologize. It's really hard. I think we all know. It's really hard to say, I messed this one up. I did the wrong thing here. It takes a lot of humility to do that. And people know that. It makes an impact, and it helps with those relationships. Participate in the conversation. If you have a crisis that's ongoing, don't just shut down your accounts. Don't retreat. Don't hide. There are multiple cases of organizations that had a pretty good Twitter following, a pretty good social media presence. They have a crisis happen. They delete their accounts. They never come back. This has happened to multiple companies. They weren't ready. They weren't ready for that response. They weren't ready to participate in those conversations. And it ended up removing a potential channel of engagement for them. And the last thing, and I think this is the most relevant to each of us as individuals is that I focused on organizations for each of the cases that I unpacked, but remember Justine Sacco. She was just a person. She was a person who sent a really dumb tweet, something that if someone had said it in the office, you would say, wow, that's really stupid and insensitive. But because she said it on social media and it went around the world, she lost her job. Now, when she tries to go on dates and you Google Justine Sacco, it's the first thing you see. It's an article by John Ronson about how she's been publicly shamed because she did a dumb thing. It's a good article, by the way. And so there's an opportunity for engaging in mindfulness and mindful communication, being aware and being present, so that you don't find yourself in that space. You don't find yourself having to apologize and having to say, yeah, I screwed up. Because perhaps the best thing that we can do when we work in these digital spaces is focus on opportunities for fostering positive communication, building relationships, and creating opportunities for engagement, and avoiding those self-inflicted crises. Thanks very much. Yeah.
They want to be careful not to apologize because they can be sued. Is it possible that they do all of those void of apology? So what would you take?
That's a really good question, Dr. Manzi. I appreciate that. And I have a story to answer your question. So first, do you remember the Deepwater Horizon oil spill, BP's oil spill? Mm-hmm. This is a big thing that happened, 2010. Wrote about it a lot. It was my master's thesis. My paper was on that event. And I have students in class now who don't know that it happened, so that's sad. But, so that oil spill is something that I think took Exxon's place in the history books for oil spills. It was a massive event. It will affect the environment and the ecology longer than any of us will be alive. And there's dozens of cases and stories and articles about the ways that they messed up. But in 1990, off the coast of Huntington Beach, BP had an oil spill. And the CEO of BP North America flew to the site and he said, my lawyers are telling me that this is not our fault, but we're going to treat it like it is. We're going to fix it and we're going to make it right. No one remembers that that happened. In an event like that, when there's a spill, when there's something like that involved, there's going to be a monetary cost. But in terms of stakeholder engagement, relationship building, and effectiveness down the road, that apology is going to serve better than trying to cover your butt. I think that is pretty consistent in the literature too. That would be my response.
When you were talking about Urban Outfitters,
yeah.
My feeling was, as you were talking about it, that they were purposely trading on negative response to attract attention. And so
it's really an important idea that there are always going to be individuals and organizations who approach the world from a different perspective than what most ethical philosophies and what most communication research would tell us is best. A lot of those individuals and organizations find short-term success. Sometimes they find long-term success, but it comes at a huge cost. Okay. And so I would say, other than being aware of those things and making decisions about how you act, other than a decision to pursue ethical activism, I don't know what you would do to try to change those organizations. Really interesting research in the sales industry says that for any industry, if a mom in her late 30s or early 40s recommends something, it will be successful. And you can't get that audience to recommend something short of them having a good experience. So there's a lot of power there. There are things you can do, but it takes time, it takes engagement, it takes a commitment to seeing some of that change. And it's hard.
Sometimes the things that happen that are self-inflicted wounds happen because of our employees or our constituents. We don't control what they do on social media, and it reflects bad on the organization. I'd like for you to just...
So we see some interesting cultural dynamics in this. And so if we want to take it to a 30,000-foot view, there's basically two big options. And one is manage the situation by having the organization take on that responsibility. And the other is cut them loose, if it's an instance of an employee.
So like Justine.
Cut her loose.
Yeah.
She was fired by the time she got off the plane.
Yeah.
So that's option B. Mm-hmm. I can't think of any off the top of my head, of course, because you asked. But there are multiple examples of both of those things happening. But an interesting cultural dynamic is that oftentimes the go-to response in the U.S., if it's a big enough issue, is just to say, this person has been terminated. This person has been removed from that post. In 2015, when the Germanwings flight was crashed into a mountain by the pilot who was experiencing extreme depression, the airline could have said, this person did multiple things to deceive his supervisors so that he was able to fly when he medically shouldn't have been allowed to. And that was the situation, and then sort of compensate the families, whatever. But instead they said, this is on us. We should have caught this. Those things happened, but we should have caught this. And so I think there's some really interesting, in terms of global crisis, some cultural factors there. Because we have a very individualistic culture, and we have a tendency to think of people as living and dying on their own merit, even when that's not true. And so I think the gut level reaction tends to be cut them loose. And I think sometimes it's appropriate. But I think other times there's an opportunity to say, we messed up, this person did something they shouldn't have, said something they shouldn't have, and are taking responsibility for that and are going to make it right in these ways. And I think there's an opportunity to do that oftentimes organizations don't pursue, because it's hard and it takes time and it takes work. And it means people are going to be mad at you, more so than if you just say, it's that person's fault, cut them loose, and they'll be mad at them.
More and more nowadays, I think we have this fascinating medium to reach out to the whole world, individually.
Yeah.
If I have a Twitter handle, I can reach instantly to everybody.
Yeah.
And I mess up something. There's a self-inflicted crisis in that lady's case.
There's some really interesting, it's not research, but it's interesting where you have authors and researchers, scholars, talking about the negative impact of email on the way that we communicate in writing. Because when you only had letters, you were reflective. You had to be, unless you only write in shorthand. And so the process of writing a letter allowed you time to reflect on what you were writing. With email and text message and tweets, it's instantaneous. And so I think anyone who engages in digital spaces should have a self-enforced reflective moment before they post things. Other than posting on someone's baby photo on Facebook, cute baby. Other than things like that, there's a case of a PR professor in Kansas who happens to be the lead author on the textbook I use in my Principles of Public Relations course, who after the Navy Yard shooting tweeted something horribly offensive at the NRA. And he lost his job because of it. He's no longer a professor because of his tweet. And so I think, he said afterwards, I should have taken a moment and reflected. He teaches it. He writes about it.
Oh, wow.
He literally wrote the book on how to do this well, and he messed up. And so I think one of the best things for individuals is to take a moment and reflect. And I think a piece of that is the tendency to react. We react to things. And so, show of hands, honesty moment. Who has ever gotten angry about something after you only read a headline? Right. Like 400% of people don't read articles anymore. And anyway, most statistics are made up on the spot. But there is research on it. I don't know what the stats are, in the interest of honesty and transparency. But we all have a tendency to read a headline, assume we know the situation is, and then get mad about it. And so I think there are some things that we can do to be more mindful and to be more cautious and be more engaged. If we see something, particularly if it seems sensational, we should read more about it. We should learn more about it before we post about it.
Thank you so much for coming.
Absolutely.
Let's give him a big